let's not push for a mass revolution here. I saw a Twitter feed that got me thinking about the dangers and the whole factor and this sort of romanticism around overthrowing the government that seems to be pushing in a lot of circles today. So I want to read you this little tweet feed that I saw and sort of dig deep on it and sort of look at the reality of what the sentiment is meaning and if it's applied across globally. So the first person suggests, my 19-year-old daughter is considered an essential employee. She's a fast food worker. She's exposed every day. No one gives a fuck about Alan's privilege, pampered ass stuck in her mansion. Show me Alan working on the lines at the grocery store, no mask, no gloves, then I might care. And the response is, your daughter's a hero. And then the original poster responds back saying, no, she's a slave of capitalism. She's terrified. I'm terrified. She can't quit because she'd be homeless. She can't come home because she could infect me and her sister with comorbidities. Let's call it what it is. She's not a hero. She's a sacrifice demanded by the elites. Now, those are heavy words. And I know from people messaging me and what I'm seeing online and just the general consensus that that's a common feeling at the moment, that people are upset, they're angry at the system, they're angry at the politics and the corruption and the issues and the fact that they're exposed to this sort of stuff, that stuff hasn't been done, the disparity between the rich and the poor and countries and races and genders and sexes. Like it feels like the world is getting ready to explode. And I also see a lot of people pushing for, either outright pushing for evolution, overthrow the government, bring it all down, like that anarchist sort of approach, or, pushing for the lead up to that, like let's destroy these systems. And a lot of their, if not all of their anger is well-founded. Just recently I heard the news that George Pell is released from prison and didn't get done for the charges he was up for. Obviously there's the civil cases going, but that caused a massive uproar because all the evidence weighed against him, and yet they still didn't get a conviction, and then they pushed suggesting that that's an act of corruption or just more of the same. Now, I'm not going to get into my personal opinion on that particular topic, but the anger around that topic is like just another extra thing, another extra little bit, and people are calling for the tear the whole Catholic Church down. I can see why you'd say that, and being a victim of child abuse myself, I can very much relate to those sentiments. But what does the reality of that mean? What would that practically mean? Like, it's one thing to say those words, but words can very quickly become action, and that's just one example. We can talk about that in terms of governments, in terms of businesses, overthrowing the government and replacing it with some sort of online voting system, or fighting back against oppression, or taking control of, what's the phrase? Get abolish private property, all of those sort of communistic sort of things. The problem with this is that there's this sort of glorification of an ideal. There's a glorification of what it could be to become a revolutionary, to make a change, to destroy some sort of corruption. But unfortunately, life and our story doesn't end when the corruption is destroyed. What happens when a system is destroyed? What happens when a system collapses? Like, the very prime example is the Middle East situation in Iraq. Given, the false pretense of weapons of mass destruction, soldiers go in and topple a government. And then they discover that, okay, well, that guy was a terrible person. Saddam Hussein and his leadership was disgustingly atrocious. But they were holding back a greater evil. And when we took down that government, when we destroyed the badness, something worse took its place. Chaos, and then organized evil. And, the same thing happens with revolutionary changes everywhere. I would love for a situation to change in which things just worked out well and it was bloodless. But I don't see that being a possibility. I don't see mass change happening without dire consequences. But I see a lot of people online, just general, normal, regular people talking with this sort of vitriol and rhetoric and pushing. And understandably so, but that scares me. It scares me to my core, because if enough people start pushing, stuff changes. It's very easy to think that history stopped, or that we're not a part of history, or that, you can look back upon the revolutions of the past and sort of we're detached from it because we're in the future. We've got, phones and technology and all of this sort of stuff. But look at the trends. Look at what's happening. Look at history and how it happened and how it unfolded. And you realize that people get inspired by ideas. They get inspired by words. They get taken by strong, charismatic leaders. And then people die. Then things happen. And, I don't mean to sort of be this sort of doom bringer, but it's tough. It's tough to sit back and just watch this happening. Because the thing is, upon every single little issue that everyone's having, I can relate. I can definitely agree with the person from this post. There is this general feeling that, we can't escape the rat race, that we're forced to survive. We're forced to be on the line. We're forced to work, because otherwise we lose our jobs. If we lose our jobs, we can't pay our rent. We can't pay our food. We literally get homeless and we die. That sounds terrifying. And obviously, different countries have different safety nets and all of that sort of stuff. But the sentiment is spreading, and if it's not the sentiment about this, it's about border control. It's about, like controlling regulations. It's about different rights. It's about religious freedoms. It's about whatever. I can't help but feel that given the amount of freedom we have to suggest and to push and to develop a following online and to get people to listen to us and just share and yell and scream our opinions out there, that this general discontent may cause a anarchist style revolution in which things are just teared down willy-nilly. Slow reform isn't sexy, but it won't cost as many lives. I'm looking at the way the world is responding to the coronavirus, and it's interesting because we're seeing gaps and holes in systems and in structures. A lot of my listeners are from America, and I'm so desperately worried for that whole country because, you see a lot of really rich people and a vast underclass of poor people. Looking at the stats, it was something like 30% of Americans are living, hand to mouth. They don't have any savings. Another third are in debt, right? Or another, like something along the lines of more than half of Americans have less than $400 of savings. And given the healthcare system and all of that stuff over there, they don't have insurance. They don't have the money to pay for any sort of ability to treat themselves. I compare that to Australia, that if I get sick, I just go for free to my doctor and it's paid for. The government pays for it. Obviously, it's a different government, different systems, different values. But we obviously here would pay more tax to cover that. But it's a safety net. I can't help but worry that extreme capitalism is, that you see presented in America isn't necessarily the right answer, right? It sort of felt like with the fall of communism, communism versus capitalism won. Well, yeah, they won against communism. But it doesn't mean that capitalism is the right answer. Not straight, not pure capitalism. Perhaps we need to find some sort of balance where there's more government intervention, more research. I was listening to a podcast on the Sam Harris Waking Up podcast. Common Sense, but not sure what it, the Sam Harris podcast, and he was saying that there's no real incentive for big businesses to put the millions and billions of dollars in preventative cures for something like a coronavirus, because let's say they spend all that money, they fix the problem, they don't get financially rewarded for it, so they don't do it. In the same way, there's no financial incentive for big businesses to stockpile stuff. They want to get as lean as possible, so they don't stockpile. They put things, they have, just in, just out, just in time supply chains, and they have them from the cheapest place. Right? So then you find that all of your supply chains are coming from the same place, China, India, those sort of things, and they're arriving just in time with no surplus. It's great during times of peace and prosperity and not crisis, but when something like this happens, everything gets disrupted. That podcaster was he was talking to a general and the general's assistant, and basically they were saying the analogy that, even the US military gets its medical supplies from China. So they're still knocked out just as badly. And imagine like outsourcing your bullet production to a potential enemy nation. That sounds a little bit silly. And yet that's what's happening, all for the sake of profiteering and grinding out that, those little percentage points. The problem is that I don't see an alternate solution, because given the way the world is currently set up, it benefits people and organizations in the short term to be selfish, in the short term to cut all those corners and do all of those things. And, fair enough. That's the incentive system. If I say you're going to get $10 if you do this, a lot of people are going to do that thing. But the problem is, it goes down to this like idea of the problem of the commons. We are all living together in the same world, right? The actions of people in China and America impact me in Australia, just as my actions over here will impact you in the United Kingdom or India or wherever, right? Why? Well, I consume a lot of stuff, and also I'm projecting my opinion, and I can be a carrier for a virus, right? We're all interconnected here, but we're not acting like that as a species. We're a collective species on one place, but we're acting like from little personal silos. That approach might have worked in the past, when you could live in one country and not even know the existence of another country. But we're long past that. I can talk to people in another country in real time now. The pollution I make impacts people across the world. The actions, my buying choices, all of that stuff impacts everyone else. So we're completely interconnected. But we're not acting like that. Add to that the stress of a massive underclass of the world with not much money to survive, to be able to provide necessary healthcare and just basic food, basic doctoring, all that sort of stuff in supposedly rich and wealthy countries. It's a recipe for disaster, and it scares me. The only way that I can see through this is that we all individually in our own personal lives try and take a step back and detach and start looking at things from a more global perspective. There's an approach that I've been looking at it's a form of meditation actually, called the headless way. And one of the ideas of this is looking at who you are from different levels. So you're seeing me, if you're watching the video, or you're hearing my voice, but you're seeing me from that sort of 3 to 6 feet approach. You see my body. But if you come up super close, I'm no longer a body, I'm skin. Come up closer, I'm cells. Come up closer, I'm atoms. And if you step further back from me, I'm no longer a person, I'm a family unit, I'm a country, I'm a world, I'm a solar system, right? Suggesting things like, well, I need my heart to survive just as much as I need the sun to survive, right? And you can look at a person from different levels, different distances, and see that they're just as much, like it's just as much of them. I'm as much of my community as my cells are me. The exactness, the meanness is a lot more broader than just me at 6 feet. We've all got this feeling that we stop where our skin stops. But even me saying these words to this microphone and you listening to them shows that I don't stop there. My thoughts are in your brain right now. Okay? And no matter what you do, you can't unhear them. So that means that I'm extending beyond my physical self. Okay? When you connect back to me, you're extending back. We're all connected here, and we're far more bigger than just where our skin ends. If we can start having a more global approach and looking at us as a collective species, as opposed to individuals with individual goals, it would be far greater. Now, I'm not talking about devolving into communism, right? Because communism doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is that centralized command, centralized structures for every decision makes no sense. Because the people at the top can't possibly understand the reality on the ground. My reality will be different to your reality because we live in different areas. We have different personal problems, different environments, different cultures, all of that sort of stuff. Okay, I'm suggesting a more nuanced approach, and I thrive on people that go deep into the nuance. If you haven't already, check out Dan Carlin's Common Sense podcast, because he goes deep in the nuance rather than sort of going left ring, right ring, or me versus you. There's a lot of nuance there. The problem is that nuance isn't sexy. Nuance takes a while to get across. but it's what can save us, because there's going to be, a lot of complex interconnected problems that the only way we can get through this is to talk it through. If we talk about, this stuff in tweets and in soundbites and all of this stuff, we get, how can we express our displeasure like these people are talking about in the initial tweet, in such a short amount, 240 characters or whatever? How can we possibly have a in-depth communication about the reality of the situation? We get the sentiment across, we get that emotionality, that anger, but we don't get any deeper level of healing and health and connection or anything like that. And if we just keep inspiring and stoking and pushing that anger, it'll spread. I've had this realization that we are predominantly emotional as humans, as creatures, and that emotionality pushes us to take actions. And then we want to be rational, so we rationally justify our actions after the fact. And that leads to some, us digging ground and putting a foot in the ground and saying, this is what I believe, and sort of back-end justifying it. But when you step back from all of that, or someone external sees you, they can see how ridiculous that whole situation is. The problem is that we're all emotional, and we're responding to others' emotions with our own emotions. If we can just step back, detach, and try and think a little bit more rationally and not have such an ego involvement in every decision, and listen and talk, perhaps we'll come to better conclusions. I want to leave you with the idea that, given the times that we're in, let's be open, let's talk, let's communicate, and be willing to consider that we may be wrong with our initial opinions, and have a calm, connected, collective discussion about a way through, as opposed to just yelling at each other. If I tell you your opinion's wrong, you get defensive and you tell me my opinion's wrong, and we're arguing. If we can just talk and say, hey, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, let's discuss. And then they say stuff back and you go, and you actually consider that they could be right. It doesn't cost you anything. You might actually learn something. It's very easy to think we're right all the time and you're wrong all the time. But if I think I'm right all the time and you're thinking you're right all the time, one of us is wrong, at least, maybe both, right? If I think someone else is wrong, it's just the next logical step to consider, could I be wrong also? That's where we need to start sitting. And that way we can start talking about stuff, because the alternative is that we devolve into a anarchist revolution that will not be pretty. Like if you think the problems we've got in the world now are bad, wait until there's no police, no fire brigades, supply chains that are, completely localized, right? Think about the amount of stuff that you'll have to eat. Think about the water flowing to your house. Think about toilets flushing. Think about toilet paper, right? If we tear it all down, we're tearing everything down, not just the bad stuff. So, let's talk and let's listen, please.